The novel Gerald's Game was released in 1992. It was meant to be connected to Dolores Claiborne, both describing an incident of sexual abuse during a solar eclipse. The story follows a couple who's trying to reignite their sex life by going on a trip to a remote lake house. As the husband dies unexpectedly, the wife is left handcuffed to the bed. She fights for survival. The film was directed by Mike Flanagan, who also directed Hush and Ouija: Origin of Evil. Hey guys, and welcome back to Garage Stephen-King-a-thon, where every day for the month of October we revisit a Stephen King horror movie. Today we're talking about Gerald's Game, which I remember when this movie came out on Netflix. This was a straight-to-Netflix movie, by the way. But it was the talk of the town. Everyone was talking about Gerald's Game because it has such a good hook to it. Perfect hook to this movie. One of those premises, you're tied to a bed, you're handcuffed. What would you do in that situation? How would you get out? Would you break your arms and just slip out? Would you wait patiently for help? It's a scenario that people can put themselves in, especially me, because I'm into that kinky shit. Guys, I tried doing that joke 3 times, but I kept laughing halfway through, but I finally made it. And this movie is directed by Mike Flanagan. Many people like Mike Flanagan, and he will continue to do some work with Netflix, most notably The Haunting of Hill House, which was another hit for Netflix, and recently he directed Midnight Mass. Easter egg, ladies and gentlemen, in this movie, there's a scene where we catch a glimpse at a book that's lying on the shelf above the main character. What is that book? Midnight Mass. Boom. This guy knew he was going to direct Midnight Mass. He just knew it. Or maybe he was just a really big fan of the book and he pitched it to Netflix and Netflix accepted it. Could be that as well. Other Easter eggs include Easter eggs that are references to Dolores Claiborne, which I previously reviewed on this channel, but the whole thought of there being a sexual abuse going on during a solar eclipse, I watched this movie and I was like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that in Dolores Claiborne. Enough with the Easter eggs, let's talk about the movie. The movie starts and it has a really good setup in my opinion. It's set up that this couple's sex life is on the rocks, not really doing so well in the bed. The movie later explains why that is the case. Turns out that our main character was the victim of sexual abuse. And just very subtle things are sprinkled in as well. When the characters are driving in the beginning, they almost hit a dog. Later on in the story, the main character tries to feed the dog a steak because the dog looked hungry and the dog was eating roadkill. And that dog comes into play later in the story.
Get the fuck away! Get the fuck away from him!
Other subtle things, like when the husband goes to lean over his wife, he places a cup of water on the shelf above them, and that cup of water comes into play later on in the film. Very, very well structured. You have the setup, and then you just wait for the payoff to occur. So I like that beginning portion. I like the hook of the movie. Again, it has that feeling of what would you do in a situation like that. If you're handcuffed to a bed, what would you do? People harp on the Saw movies a bit too much. People say that it's just torture porn. I don't think people go to see it because it is torture porn. I think people go to see it, A, because the effects are very good, the makeup effects are very good. But B, there's that moral questioning. What would I do in that situation? Would I kill the person next to me? Would I just kill myself? People put themselves in that scenario and they like imagining what's going on, and it helps you get invested in the story. That's what this movie has going for it. Unfortunately, this movie really loses me as soon as the hallucinations come in. Our main character starts imagining her husband as this weird, charismatic, kind of narcissistic dude, which he was in real life, but his personality seems to be exaggerated when the main character imagines him, which is normal because she didn't have a very favorable view of her husband.
Stooping to his level to get something I needed, or was that who I really was? Underneath it all. Don't ask a question you don't want to know the answer to, I guess. A life support system for a stupid fucking cunt is more like it. How many hours have you been chained to that bed?
The main problem I had with the hallucinations is that this movie becomes extremely dialogue heavy as soon as they're introduced. And the dialogue is not all that good, ladies and gentlemen. Like, there's even a line where she's like, "Who are you?" And then he's like leaning over her and he's like, "Well, what do you think I am? Maybe I'm just in your head. Ooh." And it's just like that. And it really kind of took me out of the movie the first time I watched it. And going into this movie, I really wanted to like it. My brother loves this movie. I just couldn't get into it for that reason. I thought the dialogue was a little too hammy and it kind of didn't fit in the movie.
Well, I'm pretty sure you just lost your mind. But seeing a dog eating your husband will do that. I mean, if you're gonna have a mental breakdown, that's a pretty great excuse.
Right.
Everything seems to be told twice to the audience in this movie. Going back to that water glass example, we see that water glass being placed on the shelf above the main character at the beginning of the movie. You set it up already. You don't need to set it up again. But then you have to have a scene where the hallucination of the husband redoes the exact same action. It's almost like Mike Flanagan thinks the audience is stupid. A lot of hand-holding going on in this movie. Another example of telling information twice is we get this flashback of the main character as a child as she gets sexually abused by her father. And then you flash forward to the present and you have the ghosts explain that shit to each other again. And as an audience member, you're just like, yeah, I saw this shit. Like, move on. I already saw this. A lot of the time, the dialogue just feels like it's there to fill the runtime because it's a very simple story. And you kind of need to put some padding around it so that the movie can be a feature-length film. I think this movie would work more as a 1-hour movie or a short film, if anything. The meat of this story is when this character is trying to break out of this bed, and the puzzle making this character does in order to get out of this situation. Stuff like, how am I gonna drink water? How do I get this dog out of this room? Those are the things that make the movie interesting. Everything that was hallucination and flashback and moving back and forth, it just felt like filler. And ultimately, the flashbacks I can kind of understand. It was more the hallucinations that took me out of the movie, especially as the dialogue was kind of forced and not all that good in my opinion. To me, I didn't need dialogue to explain the character's thought process. I feel like just watching her move, just her body language, her reaching for a glass of water, shows enough of the problem solving that you don't need a ghost character to explain every move the character is doing. But other than that, the gore in this is pretty good. Spoiler alert if you guys haven't seen the movie, but she ultimately slits her wrists to use the blood as lubricant and tries to slip her hand through the handcuff in a very eek scene. It really puts you on the edge of your seat and you're really left yuck, 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 yuck. And also, another negative in this, I feel like there's too many themes going on in this. On the one hand, you have a character who's struggling with her sex life because of a history of abuse, and the abuse that her dad brings upon her is similar to the abuse that her husband brings upon her, which I kind of dug that theme. I thought that theme was good. But then you have this character who's a monster, we think is a hallucination, but turns out is a real person. And although I think the twist is kind of clever, I guess, it just doesn't fit in the story. And I'm like, what is Stephen King trying to tell me? What are the filmmakers trying to tell me? I haven't read the book, by the way. It might be different in the book. As far as this movie goes, I just don't know what was the filmmaker trying to tell me with that subplot. So, yeah, just a mixed bag for me. I was hoping to like it more the second time around, but unfortunately I didn't. Guys, we're going to talk about another Stephen King Netflix movie coming up soon, so stay tuned. More Stephen King adaptation reviews coming your way.